if it's a Vengeance Demon Hunter season, there's a good chance that Rare will be atop the leaderboard at some point, and he was. Today, he timed world first 18, and it was actually a Motherlode 18, and they were under by around 2 minutes and 45 seconds, meaning that they can probably time Motherlode 19, which is funny enough. They also had XMD. I'm not familiar with the other 3 players in their group, but XMD was a part of one of the Chinese teams that participated in the most recent TGP, so of course the caliber of the team is actually quite high. I think that the most interesting thing with Motherlode, just in general, is routing, and there was actually some pretty key moments where the route was kind of interesting. What is different about this route from a high level compared to most other players is that these teams will elect to kind of skip most of the front area of trash if possible. It's not necessarily because the Peacekeepers are bad. However, if the Peacekeepers gave 12 count, let's say, the first area would be far more incentivized to pull. The Assassins and the Thugs are also just pretty problematic mobs just in general. So outside of the first pull, where you're pressing your Bloodlust, or you're pressing all of your offensive CDs with a bunch of damage, you're really unlikely to see a bunch of high-end groups pulling the front area of trash. They also did a couple of really interesting meld Demon Hunter leap skips, and we can kind of talk about those as we see them. And we have XMD's POV here today. We got the big Arthas in the corner here. So it's crazy that their team got to actually key with Arthas. Just kind of a interesting thing to discuss. But, so right off the bat, they do have actually a fairly standard first pull. This is what a lot of pugs will actually end up doing with the Mind Soothe on the Assassins. They wait for them to run by, and then they do a larger first pull with the Peacekeeper. I've actually seen larger first pulls of this area be done, but what's really uncommon is the Rowdy Revelers getting engaged by this group. So more often than not, you don't want to do this because their throw penny or throw coin ability can actually do an insane amount of damage to your group. But whenever you have an Unholy Death Knight able to just absolutely pop off, especially on this amount of trash mobs, getting more mobs on top of the pack is beneficial for a composition like this. In addition to that, something that you might think is super interesting that's not super common this season is their mage. He's actually elected to play Frost in this dungeon as opposed to playing the very traditional Fire. I think that Frost is slept on. I think it's pretty good. I do tend to believe that's a little bit worse than Fire just across the board, but I think there's some specific situations where Frost can be particularly good. I don't think that they use it in any weird situation here. I think that they use it in a pretty standard manner here, but I do think that Frost does make sense. And you see this DK, he's just like the rest of us. He's looking for his Blood Beast procs to see if he had his Sand Lane Blood Beast actually proccing, because the blood truly is life. So now, they skip past this Peacekeeper that guards the first boss area. And this boss, he's the coin-operated crowd pummeler, is waiting to have RP started. What you saw there is that their team spent somewhere around, let's say, a minute to a minute and a half running, getting ready to get this next pull engage. And as you can see right here on screen, we already have Unholy Assault and Dark Transformation back available for our DK. And so we go for a very large second pull of this dungeon as well, where we're able to actually just do as much damage as humanly possible to this pack and kind of unload all of our offensive CDs on the boss. Then, once we unload all of our offensive CDs on the boss, we're kind of able to go on to coin-operated crowd pummeler. They actually grab 2 of these Wonton Zappers, and they pull them into the boss as well. This isn't necessarily super interesting, but by unloading all of your offensive CDs into that second pull, then you're able to kind of just use 0 offensive CDs on coin-operated crowd pummeler and then continue on in the dungeon. Using no offensive cooldowns on the crowd pummeler, or at least on pull, it doesn't really matter because the boss takes 40 seconds-ish to actually get into the damage amp phase. So it's not something that you're really rush to have your offensive CDs on pull, and in fact, it's actively probably pretty bad to have your offensive CDs on pull. You want them to be recharging and line up with the damage amp phase. So they down the boss, and they proceed to pull what I would describe as most of the extractors in this area. They don't pull all of the extractors, but since they skipped so much trash in the very beginning, they're going to have to pull a large amount of extractors, which puts their tank, puts Rare in a lot of danger. He is running a cheat death build, as you can see on screen here. Last Resort is available for him here. So the Extractor, maybe with the Puncture Cast, is a little bit less scary for a group like this, but it's still very dangerous. And they end up pulling 3 Extractors, which is one more than most groups end up pulling, but it's not the most unprecedented thing ever. Now, this next pull is I think the hardest part of this dungeon by far. This next trash pack that they are going to be engaging probably has a harder damage check than Mythic Gallywix because Taskmaster, Ascari, and the double Earthshaper pull is very dangerous. They also are going to have 2 Stone Furies in this pull. So that last Extractor that they had, they actually grabbed one of the Stone Furies into it. But this means that the Taskmaster Ascari pull is going to have 2 of these worms, these Stone Furies into them. And they only have so much time to realistically get the interrupts on this pack. So what Taskmaster Ascari does is it applies an enrage to the entire pack, the overtime ability, which increases mob haste by 30%, which does a lot of weird things. Mob haste works in mysterious ways where it can actually CDR mobs' abilities as well. But you see we have offensive CDs and we have power infusion on our DK right here. And we are basically just trying to burn down this pack at all costs. I think if they have Bloodlust available here, they probably would have elected to press it as well. This is a very, very dangerous pull. So it's kind of a question that they right off the bat go for a bunch of interrupts. As you can see right here, they have Rare and XMD on the casts of the ads that cast the AoE. And then they're going to be going Solar Beam to lock out the Earthshaper's Stone Bolt cast. Then they're going to be looking to press a Sigil of Silence. And then from there on out, it's just Rare and XMD's interrupts, and they either wipe or the pack dies. It's an it dies or I die kind of call. And fortunately enough, they know how much damage they're going to have to them. They had Dark Transformation and Unholy Assault available. They pressed Unholy Assault like halfway through the pack. It's not like that big of a deal, but they were able to make it through the pull. I think that pull sucks. Frankly, I think that pull is actually very, very scary and incredibly risky considering they were, like I said earlier, like 3.5 minutes under, like 2.5 minutes under the timer or something like that. So I think that pull is a little bit risky for not a lot of reward. Obviously, it's very time efficient, but I just feel like there has to be something that's a little bit better. So Azarok was a fairly standard boss. There's not really much going on with that fight. And so moving forward into the next pull, we don't really have all of our offensive CDs available. Like we don't have the Power Infusion. We do have the Unholy Assault. We do have the Icy Veins. We have the Incarn available. And so this composition, what you need to know about this comp is that they excel whenever there are very large trash pulls, 10, 12, 15, potentially even 20 targets. That is where this comp really can thrive. And we have these pop-off moments from our DK and our Moonkin that are able to do millions of DPS, like tens of millions of DPS in a singular pull. You can even peak in some of these specializations as high as like 20 or 30 million DPS on the first pull of a dungeon. So they're trying to optimize and min-max the amount of trash that they're pulling in this second area. And in doing how much is realistic for a pull here. And you can see they did a bunch of test subjects in the first pull. Then the second pull is going to be a bunch of weapons testers and alchemists. They have a very good way of dealing with the alchemists. I think the combination, the bread and butter of the Moonkin and the Vengeance Demon Hunter with the Silent Sigil and the Solar Beam, that allows for an insane amount of lockdown just generally. And so being able to have those two specializations is really going to open up the opportunity to have a bunch of these assistants pulled in each and every single pack. They're not very dangerous in terms of how much damage they do to the targets. The poison that they put into players is pretty trivial, all things considered. But the turn to goo cast, if that goes off, it can end up killing you off. But if you have enough lockdown like you have from a Vengeance Demon Hunter and a Moonkin, it's not something that you have to be overly worried about. Now, this area is guarded by a double Mastermind Weapons Tester Alchemist pull. This pack sucks. It's not very efficient count-wise, and the time that you have to basically kill it off by itself. The time that it takes to kill it off is not very good. Most high-end groups are electing to skip that pull. You can play it, but most high-end groups just in general are electing to skip it. And as you can see on screen right there, Rare actually glaved this War Machine. So he glaved this War Machine, and we're going to be pulling this into the boss. Rixa Flux Flame is kind of interesting because Rixa Flux Flame doesn't realistically do that much damage to the group. The only damage that is dealt to the group is via the Propellant Blast. Whenever Rixa pushes back players, the player that is targeted with the pushback takes damage from the Propellant Blast. Now, there are these crab mines that you can see on screen right here that get dropped by the War Machine, which are pretty obnoxious. But if you have a slow or a stun on these crabs, these crab bombs, it's not actually the end of the world, assuming that your healer isn't the player that's getting targeted. Whenever your healer gets targeted with the bomb and the propellant blast, then things can get a little bit tricky. But the only damage that's realistically going to be going off to the group is going to be the damage from this War Machine right here. Rare is maybe the only player that can realistically die, and after every single phase, Rixa does a large amount of tank damage, but assuming that the healer is able to ramp at an appropriate time and deal an appropriate amount of HPS, this makes a lot of sense. Now, what doesn't make sense is what happens next. And I think that this is probably the coolest part of this dungeon by far. You can see Rare here throwing his Eldrachi Reaver Glaive up towards this area. What you need to know is that there's not a wall right here in the room. And you can see there are mobs that are right here. It's a Ventrico War Machine and a Specialist. The Specialist on the boss probably creates a no-win situation where you can just wipe to the ground effects from the Specialist, but the War Machine we already saw was like pretty easy to kill off just in general. So we see this War Machine coming in. What are we going to do about the Specialist? We're going to leave it in a polymorph, which is a genius. I think that this is actually so smart whenever you're looking to min-max the time efficiency of this dungeon. The War Machine on top of the boss is scary. Like, it's actually a very scary pull, and I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you feel like you want it for the time. But whenever you're looking to optimize, especially world first level keys, there are some sacrifices that you have to make, including potentially playing War Machines on top of Rick's Flux Flame. Then, from here on out, it's basically just trying to get the War Machines and the Specialists and the Crawler Mines grouped up. They do one more War Machine. They do a couple more Specialists with a decent amount more Crawler Mines in this area, trying to kill off every single thing in this area. And then the final thing they have to do is they have to skip the double War Machine. The double War Machine is just an absolutely brutal pull, not something that you can realistically do here. This is the third time that they double jump Infernal Strike meld off a trash pack in this dungeon, kind of proving that Shadow Meld is a little bit strong. But yeah, that's basically going to be how this team was able to actually down and time the world first 18 in a Motherlode. I think that Motherlode is actually one of the easiest, if not the easiest dungeon to time the season. Maybe Darkflame Cleft is a little bit easier for the absolute highest keys on this season. But I think that you're going to continue to see some of the highest dungeons this season be pushed in both Motherlode and Darkflame Cleft. And as players continue to get more gear, as 11.1.5 kind of looms near with the potential dinar, players are going to start to get better and better gear as time goes on. Expect to see higher keys being pushed. If you enjoyed this kind of content, make sure to check out my stream. I've been streaming a lot regularly. I don't necessarily stream on Mondays, but I stream most days of the week. I end up streaming around 5 to 6 days a week. So go check out my stream. If you really have been enjoying the content, make sure you throw a Twitch Prime my way, and I will see you guys in the next video.